The battlefield had been silent for months, yet Captain Elias Ward could still feel the weight of its ghosts whenever he walked through the abandoned valley. He moved slowly, stepping over cracked metal plates half buried in the dirt, listening to the empty wind brush through burnt-out trees. The war between humans and those was over, but the ground still breathed with the memory of fear. Elias had volunteered to stay behind, helping search teams locate any wounded survivors, human or alien, who might have been left behind in the final chaos. Most days he found nothing but silence. But this morning was different. While crossing the ruins of an old outpost, he heard a faint sound. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the creak of metal shifting. It was soft, thin, almost like a frightened animal crying out. Elias stopped immediately, his breath caught. He tightened his grip on his flashlight and followed the noise deeper into the crumbling structure. Dust floated through broken corridors as he descended a narrow staircase. The sound grew clearer, small, trembling, full of confusion. When he reached the bottom, his light swept across a shattered room. The walls were cracked, the floor littered with debris, yet a faint glow pulsed from the far corner. There, a damaged containment pod lay tilted on its side. Its glass surface was cracked, and weak purple light flickered from within. Elias stepped closer, heart pounding. Inside the pod sat a tiny child. Its skin shimmered with pale silver light, though dimmed from exhaustion. Its eyes, large, glassy, and full of fear, stared up at him. Thin arms hugged its knees tightly, as if the child had been waiting in darkness for far too long. When his flashlight beam touched the pod, the little creature squeaked softly and pressed itself deeper into the corner. Elias felt a sharp ache in his chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something gentler, something almost paternal. He had seen children lost in war before. The expression was the same, no matter the species. He slowly knelt beside the pod. "I'm not here to hurt you," he whispered, even though he knew the child wouldn't understand English. His tone softened, warm like a distant lullaby. The child trembled, but did not look away. Elias took a deep breath and carefully pushed aside the broken glass. The pod hissed as trapped air escaped. When he reached inside, the child flinched, but Elias didn't stop. He extended his hand, palm open, steady and patient. Minutes passed. The child blinked, hesitated, then stretched out a tiny, shaking hand of its own. When its cool skin touched his warm fingers, Elias felt the connection spark inside him, fragile but real. "There you go," he murmured. "You're not alone anymore." The child made a soft chirping sound, confused but calmer. Elias slowly lifted it into his arms. The little creature weighed almost nothing. It was light like folded cloth, trembling like a leaf. The moment it rested against him, it clung tightly to his jacket, burying its face in his chest. His heart broke in the gentlest way possible. He stood, holding the child carefully. The ruined outpost felt different now, not just a place of war, but a place where hope had survived in the smallest form. As he stepped outside, sunlight brushed across the child's silvery skin. It whimpered and hid its face, overwhelmed by brightness after so long in the dark. Elias shielded it with his jacket, whispering soothing words even though the child couldn't understand. But somehow the soft tone seemed to reach it. The trembling eased. "I've got you," Elias said quietly. "I promise." In the distance, birds began to sing again, timid but brave. The sky stretched wide and calm, as if the world itself was ready for something new. Elias looked down at the child, lost, scared, fragile, and felt a strange certainty settle inside him. This little one had someone out there searching, and he was going to bring the child home. No matter how far the journey would take him, Elias carried the small child out of the ruined outpost and into the gentle light of morning. The child, whom he had started calling because of its soft silver glow, clung tightly to his jacket. Every sound, every rustle, every shifting pebble made flinch. The world was too loud after the cold quiet of the pod. Elias adjusted his hold carefully. "Easy," he whispered. "It's just the wind." Didn't understand the words, but the tone helped. The trembling slowed. There were no working vehicles nearby, so Elias walked across the quiet valley within his arms. The sky was pale blue, and distant mountains rose like soft shadows. Grass brushed against his boots with each slow step. Peeked out from the cloth of his jacket, eyes wide, trying to understand this new world. When a bird flew overhead with a sharp cry, gasped and buried its face in Elia's shoulder. He chuckled softly. That's just a bird, tiny thing, can't hurt you. Didn't know what a bird was, but after a moment it peeked up again, curious, cautious, hopeful. At midday, Elias rested under a weathered tree and gave a warm drink from his survival pack. The child sniffed it first, then touched it to its lips. The moment the warmth spread inside, its eyes softened. A tiny purr-like sound rose from its throat. Elias couldn't help smiling. "You like that, huh?" Nodded once, the movement small and shy. As they traveled, Elias saw how much fear lived inside the child. If a leaf fell suddenly, tightened its grip. If a breeze grew stronger, looked around nervously. Yet each time it sought comfort by leaning against him. Each time, Elias whispered calm words, rubbing its small back gently. Slowly, very slowly, trust began to bloom. By late afternoon, they reached an abandoned human shelter built after the war. Elias pushed open the metal door and sat down inside. The child took one hesitant step, then another. It touched the smooth wall with the tip of one glowing finger, studying the texture with wide eyes. The place was dusty but safe, much safer than the open valley. Elias sat on an old crate and watched explore. The child stayed close, circling around him like a tiny moon. When felt overwhelmed, it would climb into his lap without asking. Elias didn't mind. He let the child rest against him, heartbeat steady beneath the fabric. That evening, he gently cleaned the dirt from small hands and face. The child watched him with quiet curiosity. "You've been alone a long time, haven't you?" Elias said softly. Blinked slowly, eyes dim with sadness. Elias' chest tightened. He remembered the stories he'd heard, rumors that the queen had lost her only heir in the chaos of the final battle. Soldiers had whispered that the queen's grief had been deeper than any wound. If that rumor was true, then the child in his arms wasn't just any survivor. Had a family, a mother, a world that had not forgotten. Elias looked down at the small face resting against him. "We'll find them," he whispered. "I'll get you home." Didn't understand the words, but it understood the feeling. The child reached out, touching his chest where the heartbeat thumped quietly. Its glowing eyes softened with trust. Night settled around them. The shelter grew dim and quiet. Elias laid out a thin blanket on the floor, but when he tried to set down, the child's fingers curled tightly around his shirt. A silent plea. He sighed gently and sat down with still in his arms. "All right, little one, I'm here." Curled into a small ball against his chest, warm and breathing softly. The tension in its tiny body slowly melted into sleep. Elias leaned his head back, staring at the ceiling. He felt tired, but not in the painful way he once did. This weariness felt different, purposeful, almost peaceful. For the first time since the war ended, Elias didn't feel like a soldier wandering aimlessly. He felt like someone who had a mission. Someone who mattered again. And the frightened little light was counting on him. Elias had never flown a ship alone before, but necessity had left him little choice. The small human scout vessel sat quietly on the landing pad, metal gleaming under the twin suns of the border planet. Clung to him tightly as they stepped aboard, its tiny arms wrapping around his neck. Its eyes, dim with fear earlier, now shone with a faint curiosity, reflecting the soft glow of the control panels. "Don't worry," Elias said softly, guiding the child into a small seat. "I'll keep you safe," tilted its head and made a tiny chirping sound as if it understood. Elias strapped them in and checked the instruments. The ship hummed to life, a low vibration that vibrated through the floor and into their bones. Hands gripped his sleeve, not fully relaxed, but not panicked either. As they lifted off, the landscape below shrank, replaced by a vast black sky dotted with distant stars. The child pressed its forehead against the glass, fascinated by the tiny points of light. Elias watched quietly. The war had been cruel and merciless, but here, in the silence between worlds, he felt hope stirring. The journey would take them far, beyond old battle zones, through asteroid belts, and across sectors abandoned by both species. Each light year passed slowly, measured in humming engines and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the child resting against him. Sometimes would murmur in its own language, the words soft and broken. Elias couldn't understand them, but the sound was comforting, a reminder that life persisted even after chaos. One night, as the ship drifted through an empty stretch of space, Elias noticed trembling. He pulled the child close, feeling its tiny body shiver against his chest. "It's all right," he whispered. "Nothing can hurt you here." He hummed an old lullaby from Earth, a melody of slow, calm notes. Hands loosened their grip, its breath growing steadier. For the first time since he had found the child, Elias felt a quiet bond deepen, stronger than words could describe. The next day, they navigated through a belt of jagged asteroids. The ship rocked and groaned, warning alarms flashing briefly, buried its face in Elias' chest, whimpering softly. Elias reached behind him, holding the child steady. "We'll get through this," he said firmly. The tiny fingers curled around his shirt, holding on with trust and desperation. When the danger passed, the child peeked up at him, wide-eyed, and Elias smiled. "See, nothing can stop us together." As they neared the coordinates whispered in old communications logs, Elias grew anxious. The Queen's location had been unconfirmed for months, cloaked in secrecy. He didn't know if she would even be alive or if she would welcome a human bearing her lost child. Yet every time he glanced down at the child's trusting gaze reminded him why he had to continue. To stop now would be to betray everything he had promised. At night, while slept curled in a small chair, Elias stared out into the void. Stars stretched endlessly, indifferent to war, grief, and hope. And yet, amidst that infinite darkness, he felt a spark, a light of purpose. This fragile being, small and lost, held the power to heal more than one wound. By returning, Elias could offer a mother what she had lost. He could restore a connection between worlds torn apart by blood and fear. When morning arrived, stirred, blinking sleep from silver eyes that reflected the cosmos outside, it stretched tiny arms toward Elias, making a soft noise like a call. Elias scooped the child into his lap. "Not far now," he said. The words were more for himself than a quiet promise that whatever awaited them, they would face it together. In that moment, amidst the humming engines and cold stars, Elias understood something simple but profound. Heroism was not always about fighting. Sometimes it was about carrying hope across the darkness, holding someone else's life with care and refusing to let go. And with its trembling hands and cautious curiosity was teaching him that lesson in the most powerful way. The Queen waited somewhere out there, her heart heavy with loss. And soon, Elias thought, her arms would hold what she had believed gone forever. Until that moment, he had only the hum of the ship, the trust of a small alien child, and the silent stars stretching endlessly ahead. But that was enough. Because he was not alone, and neither was, the rose before them like a jewel floating in the endless black of space. Its surface shimmered with colors Elias had never seen, pools of violets and blues that seemed alive, shifting under the twin suns. Crystal towers stretched from the ground like enormous spires of light, reflecting the fading glow of distant stars. Even from the ship, Elias could feel the weight of history and power in the planet's design. This was no ordinary place. It was a palace and a fortress and a home all at once. Sitting quietly on his lap, stared with wide silver eyes. Its small hand reached out instinctively to touch the window, pressing a glowing fingertip against the shimmering world below. It chirped softly, as if recognizing the land, though it had never been here before. Elias felt a knot tighten in his chest. Soon he would hand this fragile life back to its mother. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. The ship landed on a smooth, elevated platform at the heart of the citadel. Guards immediately surrounded them, their armor polished and reflecting the light of the crystal towers. They were tall, almost ethereal, and their eyes were sharp and unyielding. Elias felt a twinge of unease. One misstep could turn this encounter into disaster, but he held close. The child hid behind his legs, tiny fingers curling into his jacket. "I am here in peace," Elias said firmly, holding his hands out, careful not to startle the. "I bring someone who belongs to the Queen." The guards exchanged glances, peeked out from behind him, its small head trembling. One step, two steps. And then something remarkable happened. The guards lowered their weapons slightly, curiosity softening their stance. They could see the child, they could see hope. Elias was led through corridors of glowing crystal, the walls pulsating gently as if alive. Light flowed through them, casting moving shadows and colors across the polished floor. Clung to him the entire way, sometimes peeking over his shoulder, wide-eyed and silent. The hum of the citadel was gentle, yet powerful, filling the halls with a sense of presence that Elias had never experienced before. At last, they reached the grand chamber. It was enormous, its ceiling lost in glowing mist. Pools of liquid light reflected the towering figures of statues and pillars, and energy pulsed softly from every surface. And at the center, tall and elegant beyond imagination, stood the queen. Her skin glimmered like polished silver, her eyes wide and luminous like twin moons. Even in stillness, she radiated authority, grief, and power all at once. Elias stepped forward, his voice steady but soft. "Your Majesty, I believe this is yours." Hesitated, looking between him and the towering figure. Its small, trembling hand reached out. The queen's gaze fell on the child, and her composure wavered. The first falter came in her eyes. They widened in disbelief, in hope, and in a pain that seemed centuries old. She moved closer, hands lifted delicately, shaking slightly as though afraid the moment would vanish before she could touch it. Made a soft chirping noise, uncertain but curious, and stretched its tiny arms toward her. The queen's lips parted in a soundless breath. Her hands, so powerful and precise, finally touched the child's arms, careful and trembling. The room seemed to still around them, as if even the pulsing light paused to witness this reunion. Elias took a step back, giving space, holding his breath. This was not a moment of victory or war. It was a moment of love, raw and fragile. The child's silver eyes softened, reflecting the light of the queen's presence. And then, slowly, impossibly, the queen lowered her face to the child's, her own breath catching as if she were afraid to believe what she saw. Her arms wrapped around, holding it close, gentle yet unshakable. A quiet sob escaped her lips, an emotion Elias had never expected to see from a ruler. "Mother," the child whispered in its soft, trembling voice. The queen froze, tears shimmering in her eyes. Then she whispered back in the same language, her voice breaking but tender. "Yes, my child, you are home." Elias exhaled slowly, chest tight with relief. The journey, the fear, the uncertain days all led to this. And in that vast, glowing hall of power and silence, he realized something simple but profound. He had witnessed something greater than war or diplomacy. He had witnessed hope restored. For the world was no longer frightening. For the queen, the universe felt complete again. And for Elias, humanity had shown its greatest strength, not in weapons, but in courage, compassion, and the simple act of keeping a promise. The queen held close, her glowing silver hands trembling as if afraid to crush the fragile life she had thought lost forever. Her eyes, brilliant and powerful, now shimmered with unrestrained emotion. She lowered her forehead gently to the child, letting their breaths mingle in quiet unity. The hall of crystal light felt suspended in time. The usual hum of energy softened into something almost reverent, as though the citadel itself understood the gravity of this reunion. Blinked up at her, unsure but drawn by the warmth of her presence. It raised one tiny hand and touched her cheek, tentative and curious. The queen's breath caught in her throat, and a soft vibration ran through her chest, something akin to a purr but deeper, an echo of a mother's love and relief. She whispered words in her own language, a low, trembling melody that filled the space around them. Responded with its own delicate chirps, and for a moment neither spoke nor moved. They simply existed together, a mother and child reconnecting across the cruel distance of lost time. Elias stepped back quietly, giving them space. He felt a lump in his throat he hadn't expected. He had fought countless battles, seen countless horrors, yet nothing had touched him like this. This reunion wasn't just the return of a child. It was the restoration of something sacred, a bond that even war could not sever. He realized that this fragile little life, which had clung to him in fear and trust, had carried the hopes of an entire world. "Your Majesty," Elias finally said softly, breaking the silence. "I." The queen looked up at him, tears streaming down her cheeks, eyes fierce yet luminous. "You carried my child across the stars," she said, voice quivering with power and disbelief. "A human, you bore what I could not reach. Why?" Elias swallowed, feeling the weight of the moment. "Because the war didn't matter. You needed your child back. That's all that mattered." She studied him intently, her gaze piercing yet uncertain. Small hands clutched at her robes, chirping softly. The queen's expression softened as she observed the bond between Elias and the child. Here was someone who had acted without expectation of glory, without thought of reward, someone whose courage came not from weapons but from compassion. "You," she whispered, "you risked everything for this child, for me. I do not understand why your kind carries such humanity." Elias looked down now leaning sleepily against the queen's chest. "Maybe because we know what it's like to lose someone we love," he said. His voice was quiet but steady, carrying the truth of countless losses he had seen and felt. "And we know what it's like to hope." The queen's luminous hands tightened around, and for the first time Elias saw her break completely, not in anger, not in fear, but in joy and grief intertwined. She lowered her head again, murmuring soft words in her language, letting her tears fall freely. Nestled closer, glowing faintly as it accepted the comfort only a mother could give. Around them, the citadel seemed to breathe with light, casting gentle shadows across the grand hall. Guards who had watched tens of thousands of events in their lifetimes now stood silent, moved by something they had never been trained to witness. This was no act of ceremony, no display of power. This was the quiet, unspoken force that bound worlds together: love, hope, and trust. Elias took a small step back and allowed himself a deep exhale. He had come to deliver a life, not expecting recognition, but now the queen's gaze softened toward him. Gratitude, deep and unspoken, shone in her eyes. He realized then that this act, carrying a lost child across impossible distances, was more than a mission. It was proof of something greater about humanity: the courage to protect, to nurture, to believe in hope when all else seemed lost. For the first time since the war, Elias felt lighter, as if the burden of every battle he had fought had been lifted, replaced by something enduring and true. Asleep in the queen's embrace was home. And in that soft, glowing hall, Elias understood a simple truth: compassion could travel farther than any starship, stronger than any weapon, and warmer than any hearth. And somewhere deep in the queen's voice, soft yet commanding, Elias heard the promise that would echo for the rest of his life. "Your heart is safe here among us, human. You have earned your place in the light of this world." Stood quietly, watching the queen cradle. The room shimmered with crystal light, yet it felt warmer than any hearth he had ever known. Guards and attendants hovered respectfully at the edges of the chamber, their eyes wide with astonishment. They had seen countless humans in war, aggressive, cold, unfeeling. But this human soldier was different. He had crossed star systems to return what had been lost, and now the child's safety radiated from his very presence. The queen lifted her head, eyes still luminous from emotion, and regarded Elias fully. "You carried my heir across the void," she said, her voice a blend of power and vulnerability. "You risked yourself for a life that was not your own. Why would you do this?" Elias took a steadying breath, trying to calm the tremor in his chest. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "Because fear is lighter when someone holds your hand. Because hope is stronger when someone refuses to let go." The queen's gaze lingered on him, searching, measuring, weighing his every word and gesture. Nestled in her arms, chirped softly, and raised a tiny hand toward Elias. The child's eyes glimmered, reflecting both trust and familiarity. That gesture, so small and unassuming, spoke louder than any words could. The queen followed's gaze, her expression shifting from stern authority to quiet understanding. "You have proven that your kind is capable of more than destruction," she said. "You carry a strength I did not expect, not in your muscles, but in your heart." Elias felt a warmth spread through him, one that had nothing to do with the ship or the suns outside. It was pride, not the pride of a soldier who had won a battle, but of someone who had preserved life, nurtured trust, and honored promises. He had not thought of recognition. He had thought only of the child and of the mother who would finally know peace. The queen gestured to her attendants, who moved to present gifts and honors of her culture. Elias accepted none of them, his attention on and the way the child now rested without fear in the queen's arms. But the queen insisted, pressing a small pendant into his hand. "This symbolizes trust," she said. "It marks you as one who has acted with honor, not for power, but for the life of another." Elias looked down at the pendant, a small crystal carved into a spiral that glowed faintly. He felt the weight of it, more meaningful than any medal he had ever received in human service. It was a reminder that courage could take many forms. Then the queen moved closer. She knelt slightly to meet his eyes, a gesture of humility rarely seen among her people. "I do not often bow," she said softly, "but for you, human, I will. You have brought back what I thought lost. You have earned the trust of thee and the heart of a mother reunited with her child." Elias felt the enormity of the moment. He had crossed war-torn planets, navigated silent stars, faced the uncertainty of meeting a ruler whose power could crush him in an instant. And yet in the queen's eyes, he saw not suspicion or fear, but gratitude and respect. For the first time, he understood that heroism was not always celebrated with parades or banners. Sometimes it was honored quietly in the recognition of those whose lives had been changed forever. Chirped again, nudging toward Elias. He reached out, letting the child climb onto his shoulder briefly, feeling the tiny heartbeat against his own. The queen watched this small interaction and smiled softly, the first fully peaceful expression he had seen from her since their reunion began. "You may stay here as a guest," she said finally, voice firm yet gentle. "Among the you are more than a visitor. You are a bearer of hope, a reminder that even after war, trust and love can survive." Elias nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He had not sought recognition, yet it had found him in the most profound way. Across galaxies, across fear and darkness, he had carried life and hope, and in doing so, he had bridged two worlds. For the first time in months, Elias allowed himself to relax fully. The child, the queen, and the people of this alien world were safe. And in the quiet light of the citadel, he understood that some missions were more than duty, they were destiny. The chamber glowed softly with crystal light, but for Elias, the radiance was nothing compared to the warmth spreading from the queen, and the child rested in her arms, silver eyes blinking slowly, trying to understand the figure who had carried it across the stars. The queen's hands cradled delicately, her breathing uneven with relief and joy. It was a reunion neither time nor distance could undo. Elias stepped back, giving them space, though he felt a quiet pang in his chest. He had crossed so many dangers, risked everything, and yet this moment belonged entirely to them. Stirred, lifting its small hand to reach toward the queen's face, its eyes soft with curiosity and trust. The queen leaned closer, her forehead brushing the child, a soundless hum of recognition and love escaping her throat. "Mother," the child whispered, its voice small and trembling. The queen froze for a heartbeat, then whispered back, voice breaking with emotion, "Yes, I am here, you are home." The words hung in the air, gentle and powerful. The child nestled closer, glowing faintly as it absorbed the safety and warmth radiating from the queen's presence. Its tiny arms wrapped around her neck, the trust in its touch stronger than any words could convey. The queen pressed her face to the child, tears sliding down her cheeks, catching the light like falling stars. Elias watched quietly, letting the reunion take its full course. He had seen many displays of power and anger in his life as a soldier, but nothing compared to the quiet, unspoken force of love and relief filling the chamber now. The queen's arms trembled, her entire form humming with energy, yet in that vulnerability lay more strength than he had ever witnessed in battle. Blinked slowly, silver eyes shining, and whispered another soft word in its language. The queen smiled through her tears, a rare, full smile that transformed her from ruler to mother. She murmured back gently, soothing the child's voice as though calming a small flame. Each sound, each movement, was a rhythm of reconciliation, a harmony that healed wounds older than Elias could imagine. Then looked up at him, making a tiny chirping noise, its small hands reaching toward his chest. Elias knelt slowly, heart tight with emotion, and let the child climb onto his lap briefly. The queen watched, her expression softening further. She spoke, her voice low but resonant in the tongue, and chirped in response. Elias felt a quiet connection, a moment bridging two species united by trust, care, and hope. "You have done more than any soldier could," the queen said, her gaze meeting his. "You returned what I feared lost forever. You carried hope across the stars, human. You have earned your place among us not for your strength, but for your heart." Elias shook his head, touched and humbled. "I just did what I had to do," he said quietly. "The child needed me. You needed your child back. That's all that mattered." The queen inclined her head, acknowledging him fully. Now calm and glowing softly in her embrace, repeated the word again, louder this time. "Mother." The queen held it close, whispering with trembling joy, "You are home." Elias watched as the child's tiny face pressed to hers, the glow of trust and love stronger than the crystal in the chamber. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of peace, of healing, of something precious that had survived even the darkest of wars. The child's voice, repeating the word again, seemed to echo in the crystal walls. "Mother, I'm home." And in that moment, Elias understood fully the truth he had carried with him across battlefields and silent stars. Humanity's greatest strength was not in weapons or conquest, but in courage, compassion, and the willingness to carry hope into the darkness. The Queen and held each other tightly, their reunion complete. Elias stood back, a quiet smile on his face, knowing he had played a small but vital role in this miracle. The halls of the citadel shimmered with a light that was neither alien nor human. It was something greater. It was trust, it was love, it was hope. For the first time since the war, the galaxy felt whole. And somewhere in a chamber of crystal and quiet wonder, a mother and her child whispered to each other, "I'm home." Elias walked out of the chamber slowly, heart full, carrying the quiet pride of humanity. Across the stars, a single act of care had bridged worlds, healed hearts, and proven that even in the aftermath of destruction, light could always find a way to shine.